The late afternoon light slanted through the glass storefronts of downtown Brookdale, painting the sidewalks in honeyed gold. It was a quiet Friday, the kind of slow, thoughtful end to a week that made the city breathe just a little softer. People lingered outside cafes, dogs tugged on leashes, and the rhythm of life moved with unbothered ease. Marcus Reid stepped out of Elliot's Book Nook, a small, independent bookstore tucked between a dry cleaner and a juice bar. He loved this place, not for the selection, which was modest, but for the stillness it offered. In a life often spent in rooms full of tension and policy talk, stillness was rare. He wore a simple gray blazer, dark chinos, and a pair of worn leather loafers that had carried him into more than one courtroom. Under his arm, a brown paper bag concealed the hardcover he had waited weeks for. Blind Justice, A History of Equal Protection. Law. It wasn't light reading, but then again, Marcus never came here for escape. He came for grounding. He unlocked his car, a dark blue hybrid parked directly in front of the store, just as a voice called out behind him. "Sir, hold up a second." Marcus turned slowly. Two uniformed officers were crossing the street with purpose in their stride. The older one, tall and square-shouldered, moved like someone used to being obeyed. His name tag read Riker. The younger one, Officer Lewis, trailed behind, uncertain, eyes flicking from Marcus to the sidewalk. Marcus kept his expression neutral, his hand resting casually on the car door. "Good afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with?" There was a pause. Riker looked him over, eyes narrowing as if trying to place him on a mental checklist. Then he gave a small nod to Lewis, who stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Can we see some ID, please?" It wasn't a question. Marcus blinked once, not out of fear, but calculation. He reached slowly into his inner jacket pocket and retrieved his wallet. "Sure, Vahant," he said, "though may I ask why?" Riker responded without blinking. "You match the description of someone seen acting suspiciously nearby. We're just following up." Marcus handed over his license with quiet dignity. "I just bought a book. That's all I've done today." Lewis took the ID, examined it, and then handed it back without comment. Riker didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head. "What brings you to this part of town?" Marcus gave a measured smile. "I work nearby. I come here often. Never had an issue before." "Where exactly do you work?" Riker pressed. "I'm in legal consulting," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. "Is there a reason you're asking?" Lewis glanced at Riker, unsure. Riker waved it off. "Just making sure everything checks out. You're free to go. For now. But we may have more questions." Marcus nodded slowly, not saying what he wanted to say. He knew the game, knew how quickly dignity could be interpreted as defiance. He turned back toward his car, opened the door, and then he heard it again. Heavy footsteps, a voice, harsher this time. "Step away from the car." The shift in tone was immediate. Riker's authority was no longer masked by politeness. Several pedestrians turned to look. Marcus gently closed the car door and turned. "Officers," he said calmly, "I've complied. I've shown you my ID. I've explained myself." Riker advanced, hand hovering near his belt. "You're acting nervous, suspicious. I said step away." Marcus kept his hands where they could be seen. "I'm not resisting, but I've done nothing wrong." And then it happened. Swift, deliberate, unjust. Riker grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisting it behind his back. The paper bag fell to the ground, the book slipping out, pages flaring like wings. "You're not free to leave," Riker muttered, pulling out handcuffs. "You're resisting." "I'm not resisting," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "This is a mistake." Across the street, a woman pushing a stroller froze mid-step. Two teenagers eating frozen yogurt raised their phones, capturing every second. From a second-story window, a voice rang out. "He didn't do anything. I know that man. He walks the street all the time. Let him go! But Riker didn't hear or didn't care. He pushed Marcus toward the cruiser, hard. Lewis followed behind, his hand on Marcus's elbow, more careful now. But he said nothing. And Marcus? He didn't struggle, didn't shout. He just looked straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes calm. Not because he wasn't angry, but because he knew exactly where this road was headed and who he was. The ride to the Brookdale Police Department was short, but the silence stretched like wire between the three men in the cruiser. Marcus Reid sat in the back seat, upright, hands cuffed behind him, wrists beginning to burn where the metal bit into skin. He stared straight ahead through the wire mesh divider, past the outline of Officer Lewis's head, past the rearview mirror, beyond the moment. Sergeant Riker didn't speak. He drove like a man chasing neither crime nor conscience, just procedure. Lewis sat in the passenger seat, unusually still. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching Marcus's gaze once. Only once. There was no recognition in that look. Not yet. When they pulled into the rear lot of the precinct, Marcus caught a glimpse of his reflection in the car window. Creased brow, dust on his shoulder, a man forced into smallness for no other reason than someone else's assumption. The irony, as always, stung sharpest when it was silent. "Let's move," Riker muttered. Lewis opened the back door with a pause. "Watch your step," he said softly, not meeting Marcus's eyes. Inside, the precinct was alive with the usual sounds, phones ringing, radios crackling, boots echoing on tile. Marcus walked without resistance, posture straight, shoes tapping steadily against linoleum. He noticed the looks, some curious, others indifferent. A few officers nodded absently, not recognizing him, not expecting a man in cuffs to have once stood behind a podium at their mandatory trainings. But Marcus noticed everything. He always had. They let him past the front desk into word processing. A young officer seated at a terminal began typing as they approached. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Marcus Reid," Riker replied, resisting. Possible obstruction. The young officer paused mid-keystroke. "Reid?" he repeated, more softly this time. His eyes rose slowly from the screen to the man in front of him. He blinked, a flicker of confusion, then clarity. Reid. That Reid. Marcus held his gaze, calm but direct. The officer hesitated, then resumed typing, more slowly now. Behind him, Lewis froze. Something in his posture shifted. A faint crease formed between his brows as memories surfaced like ghosts. A conference room, a seminar on bias, trust, and community protection. A speaker who had said clearly, "You earn respect not with a badge, but with your behavior when no one's looking." Marcus Reid had taught that session, and Officer Lewis had been in the front row. He hadn't recognized Marcus at the bookstore, not in the blur of action, the pressure of Riker's lead, the uniform's weight. But now it came flooding back. The voice, the posture, the composure. He had helped cuff the very man who once taught him what not to become. Lewis swallowed hard. At that moment, Lieutenant Danielle Moore was reviewing paperwork in her modest office at the end of the hall. She was a recent transfer to Brookdale PD, brought in for one reason: reform. Her reputation was sharp. She didn't flinch under pressure, and she didn't tolerate shortcuts. When Riker knocked on her door and reported the arrest, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Resisting?" she asked, flat. "He was stalling, evasive," Riker replied with a shrug. "Got a little mouthy. Figured it was safer to bring him in." Moore stood up slowly. "I want to see the report, and I want to speak with the detainee myself." She stepped out of her office and walked briskly past the bullpen. Her heels struck the tile like punctuation. As she passed the booking station, she caught Lewis staring at the floor. Pale and rigid, she noticed, but said nothing yet. When she turned the corner into the holding area, she stopped. There was Marcus Reid, seated on the bench inside the cell, his back straight, hands resting on his knees, calm but not unaffected. The silence around him was thick with restraint. "Mr. Reid," she said, her tone neutral but clear. "I'm Lieutenant Moore. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes with quiet steadiness. "Of course, Lieutenant," he replied. "But first, may I ask why I was arrested?" She glanced over her shoulder at Riker. "He resisted," he said too quickly. "Did he run, yell, threaten you?" "No, but he kept questioning us." "That's not resisting," Moore said sharply. "That's a citizen asking a valid question." She turned back to Marcus. "Did you provide ID?" "I did," he said. "I complied with every instruction. I asked why I was being detained. That was the only thing I questioned." Moore exhaled, her instincts sharpening. Something was wrong. She felt it deep in her gut. Behind her, Lewis stood silently in the corridor, guilt coiling in his chest like a live wire. He had made a choice, but it wasn't too late to make another. Officer Lewis sat alone in the hallway just outside the booking area, his uniform heavy on his shoulders. Around him, the precinct buzzed as usual. Phones rang, boots echoed, and someone laughed near the vending machine. But none of it reached him. All he could hear was his heartbeat, and one voice, Marcus Reid's voice, echoing in his mind from 2 years earlier. "You don't earn trust with a badge. You earn it when people believe you'll protect them, even when no one is watching." At the time, Lewis had taken notes during that DOJ seminar, had nodded along, had even told his girlfriend afterward, "This guy Reid, he made me rethink why I wear this uniform." Now he just helped cuff that man. He hadn't recognized him. Not right away, not at the bookstore, not even when Marcus calmly stated his name. But now the weight of it pressed against his ribs like a second pair of cuffs. He didn't resist, Lewis thought. He didn't run. He didn't even raise his voice. He had only asked, "Why?" And they'd arrested him for it. Lewis pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. A moment passed. Then he opened his secure email client, one every officer was told about during ethics training, but few ever used. It went directly to the DOJ's Internal Review Division. Subject: urgent, unlawful detainment, Brookdale PD. Message: a man named Marcus Reid is currently being held without cause. Please review immediately. He hit send, then deleted the draft, then sat back. He didn't need credit. He just needed to do something right. Meanwhile, back in her office, Lieutenant Moore was running a quiet search. There was something about Marcus's presence that wouldn't let her look away. He hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't even raised his tone. But his restraint, his control, wasn't the kind of silence that hides fear. It was the kind that comes from long experience. Too long. She typed his name into the department's professional network database. Marcus Reid. The results loaded quickly. Her eyes narrowed. Former civil rights litigator. DOJ certified community liaison. Guest instructor for police reform seminars in 3 states. Lead architect of the Bridge and Badge initiative, designed to connect police forces with underserved communities. She blinked once, then again. He wasn't just a legal consultant. He was the consultant. Her phone was already in her hand before she realized it. She called a trusted contact at the Department of Justice. "I think we've made a serious mistake," she said quietly. "We may have just arrested one of yours." Miles away, Agent Charles Monroe of the DOJ was in a meeting when he received the email from Officer Lewis. The subject line alone made him sit up straighter. By the time he finished reading, he was already reaching for his jacket. Within 15 minutes, he was in a black government SUV heading toward Brookdale. A questionable detainment had just become a federal matter. At 4:12 p.m., the SUV pulled into the parking lot of the Brookdale Police Department. Monroe stepped out in a sharp, dark suit, ID already out, expression unreadable. He entered the front lobby without hesitation. "I need to speak with your lieutenant," he told the desk officer. His voice was low, clipped, but impossible to ignore. Moments later, Lieutenant Moore emerged from the hallway. She recognized him immediately. "I had Monroe," she said. "Oh," she said, extending her hand. He took it. "Lieutenant, I believe you know why I'm here." She nodded. "I was preparing to release Mr. Reid. I confirmed his credentials myself." "Good," Monroe replied, his voice cool, "because this arrest never should have happened." They walked briskly toward the holding area, passing officers who had no idea yet what storm was about to break. At a nearby desk, Riker stood, his brow furrowed. "Lieutenant, what's going on?" Moore didn't stop. She didn't answer. When they reached the holding cell, she unlocked the door herself and stepped inside. Marcus looked up from the bench, calm, composed, but tired. "Mr. Reid," Moore said softly, "I want to sincerely apologize. You're free to go." Marcus rose slowly. He glanced at Monroe, who gave a discreet nod. "Thank you," Marcus said, "though we both know this never should have happened." "You're right," Moore replied, "and we're going to deal with it." As they walked back through the precinct, silence followed them like a shadow. Officers turned away. Some stood. None spoke. Lewis stood near the hallway corner. As Marcus passed, their eyes met again. This time, Marcus gave him a small, deliberate nod. Lewis didn't say a word, but the slight shift in his posture said everything. By dawn the next morning, Brookdale wasn't the quiet city it had been the day before. The video, just 48 seconds long, was everywhere. In it, Marcus Reid stood beside Hitboy, calm and composed. He clearly stated he had done nothing wrong. Moments later, Sergeant Riker twisted his arm, slammed him against the hood, and cuffed him in broad daylight. His book hit the pavement. A woman off camera cried out, "He didn't do anything!" And then it cut to black. By 8 a.m., the clip had been shared over 3 million times. Hashtag Justice for Marcus and hashtag He Trains the Police were trending nationwide. Local reporters arrived outside the Brookdale Police Department before 9:00 a.m. A growing crowd gathered behind them. Activists, neighbors, former clients of Marcus, parents pushing strollers, high school teachers who had once invited him to speak to their classes. Their signs read, "Dignity is not optional." "We know Marcus. Do you?" This badge doesn't excuse that behavior. Inside, Lieutenant Moore moved swiftly. She called an emergency command meeting. She filed a formal misconduct review request against Sergeant Riker, put him on immediate administrative leave. She contacted the city's Civilian Oversight Board, not because the press demanded it, but because transparency wasn't optional anymore. It was overdue. Then she made another call. "Marcus," she said over the line, "I know this isn't fair to ask, but I need your voice." Marcus didn't hesitate. "When and where?" That evening, the Brookdale Community Center was packed, wall to wall. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder with church leaders, small business owners, teachers, journalists, and students. The mood was intense but quiet. This wasn't outrage without direction. It was a room waiting for something real. Lieutenant Moore stood at the podium first. Her apology was not rehearsed. It was not polished, but it was sincere. "We didn't just fail, Mr. Reid," she said. "We failed ourselves, and this department will be accountable for that failure." Then she introduced Marcus. He stepped forward in a navy shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up, no podium, just a handheld mic and a straight gaze. The room went silent. "What happened to me," Marcus began, "isn't rare. What's rare, Bus, is that this time people were watching." He paused, letting it settle. This wasn't about one bad cop. It was about a culture where asking why is treated like rebellion, where calmness is mistaken for threat, where black men are still expected to explain our presence, before we're allowed our peace. The audience listened, unmoving. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He told the truth. We don't need performative apologies. We need structural action. That means mandatory de-escalation training, transparent civilian complaint systems, partnership with the communities you serve, not surveillance of them. At the back of the room, Officer Lewis stood quietly. He hadn't spoken to anyone about the email he had sent to the DOJ. He didn't want recognition. But in that moment, as he watched Marcus speak, he felt a shift, not in the room, but inside himself. A young woman in the front row raised her hand during Q&A. "Mr. Reid," she asked, voice shaking slightly, "do you still believe the system can change after what it did to you?" Marcus's reply was quiet but firm. "I believe the system can change when people inside it dare to change it from within." After the town hall, people lingered outside under the soft orange glow of the streetlights. Some stood in clusters, reflecting. Others approached Marcus to shake his hand, thank him, or simply offer their presence. From a corner of the lot, Lewis watched. He didn't approach, yet, but Marcus spotted him. Their eyes met again. This time, Marcus gave him a longer nod. Not of approval, not even forgiveness. Recognition. Lewis returned it, heart heavier but steadier. 1 week later, Marcus returned to Brookdale PD, not as a detainee, but as a guest speaker in the department's quarterly training seminar. Lieutenant Moore had insisted that if change were going to be real, it needed to come from more than memos. It needed human truth. The training room was plain, rows of folding chairs, a flickering projector, a pot of burnt coffee on a side table. 22 recruits, most fresh out of the academy, sat quietly as Marcus entered. He didn't start with statistics or legal code. He told them what it felt like to be cuffed for existing. What does it cost a person to be presumed guilty before a word is spoken? You don't need to be perfect, he told them. You just need to pause. Ask yourself, am I seeing a person, or am I acting on a shadow someone taught me to fear? 6 months had passed. Brookdale hadn't become perfect, but it had become aware. The difference wasn't just in policy, it was in tone, in how officers showed up to town halls, not just to sit silently in the back, but to listen, to answer, to rebuild. The Civilian Oversight Board, once symbolic, now had teeth, reviewing complaints, recommending reforms, and meeting monthly with department leadership. A new initiative, ground-level unity, paired officers with local community volunteers in service projects, school visits, and youth mentorship. It didn't solve everything, but something had shifted. The silence that once protected bias had been broken, and Marcus Reid was still showing up, not as a symbol, but as a builder. That afternoon, he returned to the corner where everything had changed, 6th and Langford, the same place he'd been arrested for, buying a book. Now that corner looked different, not in buildings or signs, but in presence. A row of folding tables lined the sidewalk, each staffed by volunteers and officers, handing out flyers for summer youth programs, mental health resources, and small business grants. It was the first day of the Brookdale Community Trust Fair, a joint event born from the fallout of his arrest. And standing near the far table, clipboard in hand, was Officer Lewis. He wore no sunglasses, no armor in his stance, just a polo shirt, a quiet voice, and a steady hand as he guided 2 teens through a mentorship sign-up form. Marcus approached. Lewis looked up, surprised, but didn't flinch. "Mr. Reid," he said with a small, unsure smile. Marcus extended a hand. "Good turnout." Lewis nodded. "Yeah, better than I expected." They stood for a moment watching the kids laugh nearby, chasing a basketball into the street and back. Marcus spoke first. "This is what change looks like. Not the noise, the consistency." Lewis nodded. "I almost didn't stay in the force. After everything, I wasn't sure I was on the right side anymore." Marcus looked at him, serious. The right side isn't where you stand, it's what you do when the moment comes. No handshake this time, just mutual understanding. Marcus continued down the sidewalk, pausing to speak with a group of parents at the next table. A girl handed him a paper drawing, a police badge split in half, then stitched together with thread. He didn't say anything, just smiled, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. Later that week, Lieutenant Moore would formally announce the Marcus Reid Fellowship, a city-funded leadership track designed to place community advocates inside law enforcement advisory roles. Marcus would help design its curriculum, but he never tried to center himself. He kept the spotlight on others, the quiet officers who had stayed, changed, and grown. The young people who now walked into town halls with questions instead of fear. The teacher who had filmed his arrest and returned every month to speak at cadet graduations. That corner, 6th and Langford, still looked like any other street, but for Brookdale, it had become a beginning, because justice didn't come crashing in. It arrived quietly through choices, humility, and repetition, through people like Marcus and those who finally chose to listen. Message of the story: true justice isn't loud, it's consistent. It's found in the quiet decisions to pause, to question, and to choose what's right, even when no one is watching.